And joining me now is my guest, Thomas Woods, noted best-selling author, senior fellow at Ludwig von Mises Institute. His most recent book is out now, Rollback, Repealing Big Government Before the Coming Fiscal Collapse. I highly recommend the book. It's excellent, as are all of Tom's books. Unfortunately, though, we are not following his advice. We are not repealing big government. We're making it bigger, and so the coming financial collapse is also going to be bigger. Anyway, Tom, thanks for being on the show again.
Oh, thanks for having me, Peter.
And thanks for writing this book.
Well, I'd like to say the pleasure was mine, but I wish I could have happier news. But, I mean, what I'm really trying to do here is not just say, look, the numbers don't add up, there's going to be a default. I think in the pit of our stomachs, everybody knows that that's the inevitability. What I'm sort of doing is taking that as a jumping-off point to say, well, as long as it's coming, as long as we are going to have to scale things back because the numbers just aren't there, well, this gives us an opportune moment to reflect on the grounds on which we've been sold this government in the first place. Everything we learned in sixth grade about, without these wonderful public without Joe Biden out there fighting for you, you'd be earning $1 a week in a mine somewhere, getting your limbs blown off, or you'd be dead from exploding consumer products or whatever. I mean, these people in Washington are just there to serve you. This sort of thing can't be smashed vigorously enough, and that's more or less what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, we need more of this. The worst part about the financial crisis, I think, is the government's ability to blame it on the free market and use it as a pretense to grow government even more. I had somebody who was a member of the commission that looked into the cause, in quotes, of the financial crisis, who admitted on the show that the whole thing was a farce, that Congress had no idea in ferreting out the cause. They just wanted to blame the financial crisis on a lack of government regulation so that they can pass more regulation.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I'm showing in the book is that this is a pattern. They do this all the time. Or they'll do a partial deregulation of something, but it's a partial deregulation that makes the situation even worse than before, and so that when we have problems, then that's blamed on the free market. So the California so-called energy deregulation is an example, the savings and loans so-called deregulation is an example, and they take all these and say, well, this just goes to show you can't trust the free market. Well, no, what it goes to show is you can't have all these government guarantees lying around.
Yeah,
they even blame Iceland on the free market. You've got moral hazard and explicit bailout promises all over the Iceland case.
Look, whenever you have a mixture of capitalism and socialism and something goes wrong, it's always the socialist part of the equation that gets the capitalist part that gets blamed. Sometimes there are regulations that counteract one another. You can have one regulation that's like the gas and the other one that's like the brake, but then when you take away one, but not the other, you create a problem. And they say, you see, it was because of deregulation. No, it's because we didn't deregulate enough.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I mean, if the taxpayer weren't still on the hook for everything the S&Ls were doing, that would have been nice. If wholesale prices had been decontrolled of electricity in California, you wouldn't have had the rolling blackouts. I mean, all these things. It's time and again, and it also what feeds into it is that the longer you have government approaches to various problems, the more people lose their imagination about how we could ever survive without it. So people are sort of inclined to give the government the benefit of the doubt because they are the public servants looking out for our well-being. And they can't imagine, they honestly think if it weren't for Joe Biden, everybody would have to walk around doing his own health inspection of every restaurant, trying to watch out for botulism on his own. Like, they just can't imagine how a society could handle anything if it weren't for organized compulsion.
Mm-hmm. Now, your original book, the book Meltdown, right? That was a very good explanation of what happened in the financial crisis. When they were doing the investigation into the cause of the crisis, did anybody from Washington contact you, considering that you authored a best-selling book on the financial crisis, to render your opinion?
I think it was the same list of people who contacted you, Peter.
But are you getting any?
I think one way you get credibility, actually, today is precisely that you haven't been contacted. They only want to contact the same Beltway people who are going to be trotted out to repeat the usual version of things. But one great, if we can find a silver lining in all this, one good thing about the age in which we live now, is that because of the Internet, a previously neglected point of view like the one that you have and that I have and some people who are affiliated with us have, normally it would be easy for the Washington Post to pretend we're not there and to pretend that the choice is between Paul Krugman or monetarists who want to increase the money supply. Those are your choices. How do you want to manipulate some kind of stimulus program? And we would just be shut out. But now we can get around these people. We can go directly to the public through the Internet, and because of that notoriety, then we actually even break into the mainstream media. This is totally different from how it was 10, 15 years ago when you could barely get any respect or acknowledgement at all.
Right. Although we're still not really having that much success at getting into the mainstream. I mean, I know personally, yes, I do appear on some cable news shows weekly, whether it's CNBC or Fox, but I mean, I appear on them the way I appeared on them prior to the financial collapse of 2007. I'm just one of many people that comes on the show, but I'm not really in the more conventional media. I mean, they don't call me CBS Evening News or ABC Evening News or Nightline or 60 Minutes. I mean, they don't talk to me. I don't think they're talking to you either. So even though we are getting through to individuals via the Internet, we still really haven't broken in to the mainstream news channels as credible sources of an alternative perspective.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's right. And I suspect over time, gradually, we're going to trickle through because there are going to be more and more of us. I mean, now, the name Peter Schiff, I mean, you were a well-known guy for a long time, but it exploded in the last few years. And that sort of thing is only going to build because there are a lot of young people who especially know they are the ones who are being looted and exploited and ripped off. And, they hear a straight-talking guy like you, and they're attracted to that. And ultimately, they're going to have to take notice. But at this point, at least, though, you can read in financial newspapers or various other outlets, they will at least acknowledge from time to time that there is an Austrian perspective, and they'll quote that perspective, and they'll talk about the idea that maybe we can speak about the Fed in something other than hushed, tones of hushed reverence and waving incense in front of Ben Bernanke, that maybe we can have a criticism of the Fed that isn't simply they're not inflating enough.
The problem is sometimes, though, when the mainstream tries to describe the Austrian view as Paul Krugman has done, they describe it in the wrong way. So they don't know how to articulate our position. They couch it in such language as to discredit it while they're trying to explain it.
I know. Well, I mean, of course, and Krugman has been corrected, 2-3 dozen times. So it's hard for me to imagine this is just an innocent mistake on his part. And I think you had Robert Murphy on your show some time ago.
Yes.
And now Murphy, has got this challenge to Krugman: debate me, and we're going to raise money. And if you debate me, all the money we raise will go to a shelter for hungry people. Now, so if you don't debate me, I've got like $100,000 sitting here that's not going to go to hungry people. What would you like to do? And of course, if Krugman ever does agree to debate, Murphy will rip his head off. So that he actually set up a website, KrugmanDebate.com.
Yeah, no, he doesn't want to debate Murphy. He'd rather debate the straw man that he creates because that's the only thing he can knock down.
Exactly. All right.
Anyway,
we got some music. Does that mean?
We know what that means. That means that we're coming into a commercial break, but we got another segment, so stick around. We will continue our conversation with Thomas Woods, author of the new book Rollback, Repealing Big Government Before the Coming Fiscal Collapse. So don't go away. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com.
Been working in them cane fields, and I want to be free. Well, 99 years is a long, long, long time. 99 years is such
The Peter Schiff Show.
long time.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America, we're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Peter Schiff, and with me is my guest, Thomas Woods. Thomas, I'm watching the prices of gold and silver tick up. Gold's up about $18 now today. Silver's up over 70 cents an ounce. At least it's comforting that those of us who understand the problems and who are doing the right things with their money, who are getting out of the dollar, who are buying precious metals, at least when this fiscal collapse happens, we're going to be a lot more solvent than everybody else, and maybe we'll be in a better position to help turn the things around. Although my fear is that those of us who profit will be vilified by the government, and our ill-gotten gains may be seized with confiscatory levels of taxation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is another reason that I hope a lot of Americans wake up to what's going on, so that there are enough of us who do well that it'll be harder to loot everybody. I mean, if we have a major entitlement collapse, I mean, and this could, as you know, this is not necessarily a problem that's going to sneak up on us gradually. It could just spike out of nowhere. I mean, 'cause interest rates could shoot up, and investors around the world could get antsy, and it could just happen very quickly. If absolutely everybody gets wiped out, it's going to be very easy to demonize and vilify those who did well. It'll be easier to keep them from taking their wealth out of the country, all these things that I'm sure you have to struggle with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the situation we're right now, because we know that Social Security is in the red right now in that it is already paying out more than it collects in taxes. So any kind of big jump up in interest rates is going to precipitate a crisis right now. If we get a spike in interest rates, it's all over.
Yeah, and in fact, if you just look at the number, I mean, a lot of times people will say, well, you guys are always predicting bad news, and, how can we listen to you? Well, number one, we're not always predicting bad news, but number two, here, I don't even feel like I'm doing any predicting, because the people who are going to be heading toward retirement, when the federal government has made no provision for living up to its promises to these people have already been born. I'm not engaging in wild extrapolation or speculation here. These people exist, they're aging, and they're getting to, and we're all living longer. Now, it's great that we're living longer, but when no provision is made for the fact that, by the middle of the century, if we even make it that far without wrenching changes, which I think is unlikely, we're going to have 13 times as many people over age 100 as we have now. Now, where's that factored into Obamacare?
Yeah, well, we're not even going to make it to the middle of the century. I mean, I had a trustee on from Social Security last week on the show who admitted to me, A, that there are no trust funds, that it's a fraud, and B, that he couldn't tell the difference between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme.
I listened to that interview, and I couldn't believe he had no answer prepared for the Ponzi scheme question.
And I gave him a whole break to think about it. I didn't surprise him with it. I wanted him to come up with something, and then he was silent for a long time. So I wanted to say something because I wanted to fill up the pause. But when you point out this idea that people try to discredit you or me because they say we're perma-bears because we're always bearish, I admit I have been warning about these problems for a long time because they've been building for a long time. It didn't just come up overnight. The fact that it took years for the problem to surface doesn't mean my spotting it early on discredits me. If anything, it supports my argument that these problems were preventable. We had clear warning years and years in advance. We had time to do something about it, but those of us who were warning were simply shouted down and discredited as being gloom and doomers or party poopers.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and you could say exactly the same thing about the entitlement programs, because people who lived, the greatest generation and so on and on. I mean, they did okay. I mean, they by and large went through the system, and the system sort of more or less worked for them. So, yeah, if you were at that time criticizing these programs, well, then people would naturally think you're some sort of misanthrope, hates mankind, and you want to see people poor. But if you just know that by the logic of the program, these things have to cause damage and hurt people dramatically down the road and totally exploit the younger generation, well, you might as well say that right away when it's easier to make the changes than wait 40 years and say, oh, by the way, there's a problem, and now everybody's dependent on it, and it's a big disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. The same thing might have been said if somebody was complaining about Bernie Madoff years and years before his system collapsed. Meanwhile, people would, everything is great. Look at these great returns. What's your problem? Because it takes a while for the problem to manifest. And during that time, people get discredited.
And then in the meantime, again, because people, again, the average person doesn't even have time really to read and learn about a lot of this stuff. It's, we all know that it's possible for the Fed to, manipulate the economy to make it look like we got prosperity. I mean, you print up a lot of dollars. You can gin up the numbers a little bit and make things seem better than they really are, but it's phony prosperity. But if that's hard to persuade people of at the time,
yeah, and people don't want
you're unemployed, but but you're pulling an income from five, real estate properties. Who wants to be told that's a bubble?
Yeah, and people don't want it to end. And I know, and I've experienced it firsthand, two times in my investment career in the late 1990s when I was trying to warn people about the stock market bubble. People that were in the stock market didn't want to hear that. The people who were getting rich on .coms were upset at me for trying to tell them that they were wrong to buy these stocks. And, of course, for a while, it looked like I was wrong, and they didn't let me forget it. I took a lot of razzing in 99, 2000 because I didn't own these stocks and because I told people not to buy them. The people who owned them were making fun of me. And, of course, they ended up losing their money. And then I went through the same psychological experiment with housing, only on a bigger scale, as I was telling people they were making mistakes for buying houses and buying investment properties. And I kept warning, yet housing prices kept rising anyway, and so I was the one that looked like a fool until, of course, the bubble finally bursts. But while the bubble's inflating, nobody wants to acknowledge it, least of all the people who are currently benefiting from it because they want it to continue, and they don't want to acknowledge that it can't.
That's the world they want to live in. And yet, when it's all over, when you look back on it in retrospect, you realize how absurd the boom is. You almost can't believe people did buy it at the time. I mean, the dot-com boom makes no sense at all in light of sound thinking, but that's exactly the problem, that sound thinking is a
Well, of course, and people
bubble.
like to, go back to the housing, bubble and talk about how obvious it is that you need down payments and you can't have liar's loans and adjustable rates and negative AM and, all this stuff. But you know what? It wasn't obvious to anybody in 2005 and 2006 when I was screaming it as loud as I could and getting ridiculed for it. You could look at my mortgage bankers presentation on YouTube, Peter Schiff Mortgage Bankers, and realize, there were 3,000 mortgage bankers that were sitting there. I laid it out cold, and they still couldn't get it.
Yeah. And they still,
of course, every one of them now would say, of course, yes, of course it was a bubble. Yes, it was going to end badly. But, if you asked them that question in 2005, no, they couldn't see it at all, even though it was the same thing.
And unfortunately, even at the state level now, I mean, the federal government is where the obvious problems are, but, we've got probably 20 states at least where the pension funds are going to go bust in the next 10, 15 years. I mean, in New York, the governor at the, last year was considering.
Meanwhile, they're attacking Meredith Whitney for pointing this problem out.
Yeah, exactly. Just shut your mouth. Everything will be fine.
Yeah. Anyway, so Tom, we're running out of time. Look, I appreciate you coming on the show again. Good luck with Rollback. Hopefully, it becomes a bestseller.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.